Was it supposed to get off?
What's that?
Was it supposed to get quiet?
Yeah, waiting for
Okay.
Jeremy. We're waiting for Jeremy to click all the buttons.
Yep.
Gotcha.
Here we go in 3, 2, 1.
Personal gifts like intellect and charisma help, but neither are required enough to be a leader. Physical appearance, poise, and outward self-confidence can be confused with leadership for a time. I saw many new lieutenants arrive at the battalions and fail to live up to the expectations that their handsome, broad shoulders look generated. Leaders walk a fine line between being self-confident and humility. People are born, leaders are made. And you can read all kinds of books you want. You can make all kinds of plans you want. But when you get out in the field, those books and those plans might not meet the eye of the situation you find there. You just have to roll with it.
What's up, y'all? Welcome to the Sports Medicine Broadcast, a podcast to promote and improve your practice as an athletic trainer. John Seco just read a quote from General Hackworth and from General McChrystal, and we're continuing the leadership series. We got Kevin Parker joining us. Kevin was on last season with the leadership series as we talked about leaders as heroes, and he shared some of his story and insight. He currently gives leadership to the Michigan Athletic Trainer Society. He's been at Aquinas College for 25 years as the athletic trainer, working with the collegiate athletes there. He's also been in multiple other leadership positions. Today, we're talking about earned leadership. So this is sportsmedicinebroadcast.com/earned leadership. Again, sportsmedicinebroadcast.com/earned leadership. And a lot of lessons we are discussing will be from the book About Face. And so it was interesting. I was listening to the Jocko podcast that was about the book About Face, and some of those lessons, the things he talked about, and it really is like book About Face. But John's going to get a lot more into those details. So without much further ado, sportsmedicinebroadcast.com/earned leadership, and you've got John Seco.
Thanks, Jeremy. Yeah, I think when we look at this book, well, first of all, every summer I try to take a larger book and kind of fill my summer with the lessons, the words, and last 2 summers I've looked for about 1,000-page book because I know that I'll have either enough time or I'll try to sneak away enough time to read one full book. That's a pretty lengthy book rather than just kind of filling it. So last summer, I don't know, Jeremy, if you remember, but I was carrying this book around, just under 1,000 pages at NATA. Whenever I got a chance between recordings or, whenever we were at the booth in the expo center, I was trying to sneak away and read a couple pages, or at the end of the night, trying to read some of this. And we've covered plenty of books. Every single one of them has been about leadership. For me, I am a student of history. I love reading history as much as I can. And this was a great one for me because it covers such a long time. Colonel Hackworth served during World War II, albeit at the very, very end of it. I think he even kind of touches that he doesn't feel that he's a World War II veteran, but served in Vietnam. And there's so many parts of this book that really exist, I guess, people who are students of Vietnam and the lessons we learned. Lessons help us shape our leadership styles and how we go about things. Luckily enough, or unluckily enough, we are going through a time right now that is putting leaders under microscopes. And how do those people who are in leadership positions operate? And how do those people get there? We also learn that sometimes people get in those leadership positions through false ways. They go about it the wrong way. We'll kind of touch on that a little bit. And then you see the people who go about it the right way. And Colonel Hackworth is a really good example because he went about things from the point of view of the military almost the right way. He was brash, he was eccentric, he was in people's faces, but he wanted things done correctly for a certain reason. And he was always truthful about his reason about why he went about things. And then how he left the military. He wanted to make sure that things were getting done correctly to try to save lives. And he felt the best way to go about it was to expose the wrongdoings of what was going on and how things were being misled that were leading to thousands upon thousands of deaths. So, that's a little bit about the book, a little bit about who wrote the book. Kevin, do you want to add anything about Hackworth?
Hackworth in particular, no, but I do want to, Jeremy, 25 years in the profession. This is only year 15 of Aquinas. So I'm old, but I'm not that old. While you were talking, John, I looked back to see when it was that I read about Face, because I keep a list of books I've read and kind of when you finish them. And I remember, much like you, that this is a book that it took me months to digest through because it's so dense. Even if you're reading today, it takes a while. But it was March of 2018 when I finished this, and much like you, periodically go back to it because there are some timeless lessons of leadership. I think the thing that's, to me, that's inspiring about David Hackworth is that he epitomizes, almost epitomizes the classic, what you look for in a leader, the humility, the lack of an ego. He did have a little bit of an ego about certain things that were important to him that he felt mattered. But I think he holds up in leadership much like you look back to leaders in past throughout history. Grant during the Civil War and his presidency. You going back to ancient times of Marcus Aurelius and leading Rome during the plague and things like that. I think that even though he never set out to be that, he is a great case study in what it takes to be a leader, and that leadership is more than standing up in front of people and telling them what to do.
So, Kev, we talked about it. It's a massive book. Even we talked about it earlier this month on bringing this to the podcast and what can we learn from it. There's so many stories. Every single story has a lesson to be learned, whether he wrote it for that reason or not. We really have the opportunity to pull from each story things that were done incorrectly and how they impacted his lesson on leadership and what impacted his next decision and his decision making. This is hard to ask that question, but what was your favorite part of the book?
Favorite part? There's quite a few that you go back to. I think the average person who reads this is going to reference, and this was the part that in Josh's podcast, the second or third one he did way back when he first talked about the book, was when he took over the battalion in Vietnam that was the not well disciplined, and he quickly transformed them into a well-oiled machine and a fighting force. And everyone, people who aspire to be leaders, everyone wants to be that transformational person who comes in and rights the ship and corrects the direction that things are going downhill, and not necessarily be the savior, but be the person who stepped in, was the person at the right time to step in and solve the problem. And I think that if that's your takeaway from this book, then you're missing the forest for the trees, because there's so many. I think probably two parts that resonate with me the most is early on in the book when he's talking about his time in Italy, in Trieste, I think that's how you say the name of the place. And when he was a corporal, and the example that he had as Sergeant Przinka, that was the soldier, and he learned how to do things the right way. Because if we use Hackworth as an example of someone rising through the ranks from an enlisted guy at 15 to reaching the highest rank you can before becoming a flag officer, and that those, not necessarily the battlefield promotions, but the battlefield promotions and moving up the chain, that much like we deal, and I think this is also, people would ask, well, what can, as athletic trainers and healthcare providers, why are you reading a book about war? How can you relate a book about a man's service in Korea and Vietnam, and how do you relate that to your day of dealing with ankle sprains and stuff that doesn't seem on the same level? But I think the overarching lesson that I take from this book, and it's easily applicable, is much like in our profession, where you're dealing with an injury and you're doing a rehab and someone has to earn the right to progress. Well, we take that in leadership, and you have to earn the right to be a leader. And ultimately, that step one of that is, are you capable of doing your job? And are you able to do your job? And are you able to do your job well? Because no one gets extra responsibilities, which is all leadership is. No one gets extra responsibilities if you're not taking care of the stuff you're already supposed to do. And I think that's the lesson from early on in his time in Italy, that he learned how to be a soldier. He learned not only the, hey, keep the haircut and things like that, but the important lessons of know where you are, be present, know where your feet are on the map, know your equipment inside and out, be able to do your job. Because if you're not able to do that, no one's gonna carry that over and give you more responsibility. And you see that time and time again. Why is he successful in Korea? The opening part of the book, he's talking about being on the tanks and as a sergeant and wanting to shoot the lieutenant because he's not doing his job. And it drives the point home there. Hackworth was successful because he was good at what he did. The second part that kind of resonates with me, you go from the beginning of his career to the end of his career, his last command in Vietnam, the Team 50, and where he ended up getting into some trouble because of things they were doing. They commandeered some supplies to improve the camp, and they were doing things not necessarily to regulations. They were very much doing their job on missions and executing the missions that they were given. And what resonates with me, Hackworth, the lesson there from it is you take care of your people. That as a leader, leadership really, to me, is identifying problems and identifying the people that can solve the problem and giving them the resources to do it. And that's what he illustrated there with at the beginning of his career. Be good at your job and be good at your job. That's the bottom line. At the end of his career, part of being good at your job, when you get to that leadership position, is taking care of the people underneath you. And that's just, and those are things like that we see, in athletic training, that, hey, you're at the day-long event and the administrator brings you lunch, not because he has to, but because he understands that you're not able to get away and go get lunch. Those two resonate really highly with me. And I know you asked for my favorite part, and I've given you, I'm going to give you one more that also kind of stands out, is the when he talks about being at Fort Lewis and saving the sergeant's career after the sergeant executed some discipline on the guy not following regulations, and that he recognized, saw the issue, problem solved in a way that everyone was happy. That he framed it in such a way that the kid who was filing the charges got what he wanted. He framed it in such a way that the sergeant, he wagged his finger at him and said, "Don't do this again," or "Be smarter about doing this." got what he wanted, wasn't overly punished, and the problem was taken care of. And again, that's, to me, that's leadership, problem solving. So there you go. Hope that wasn't too long-winded. And I know you wanted a short, concise. But there's so much in this book. I mean, truly, it could be 3 separate books. It could be his time up through Korea, his time, the lessons he learned. You could separate Vietnam in from when he was in theater and combat, and then when he was in the Pentagon, because the lessons are completely different. Yeah, there's just so much in this. It's phenomenal. It's a great book.
That's the hard part about when you're trying to dissect a, close to 1,000-page book and trying to do it within an hour. There's so much. And like you said, this book can really be split up multiple different ways. And you can see why, Jocko talks about this and how he always comes back to it, and how you're able to flip open the book and read a chapter, read a small paragraph or whatever. And you can just open it, put your finger down, read that page and say, what did I just learn from that? And this book isn't overly academic. It's not written so that you have to read it over and over to get what it's meaning. I mean, the words are there, the meaning's there. It's how are you going to understand what you take from that? And, for me, like I said, we're in this time right now that's examining and putting leaders under a microscope and how they handle situations and how they listen to certain people, whether it's the yes man, the no man, whether it's the friend that's giving them the bad advice to just kind of prompt their position up a little bit more. That's how we're seeing some leaders take. They're the ones that are grabbing the coattails. And, for me, when he talks about it, he examines the military so much so that you read it so many different times in the book. And, one of the things I normally when we do the podcast, I will go out and write through whether it's a snippet or a line in the book, because this book was so long that I didn't do that this time. So we're getting to see a little bit how the sausage is made right here with the leadership podcast. But, I just wrote down pages in the book that I wanted to go to. And so I'm going to be going back and forth a little bit. And I want to read a little bit from some of the pages in the book that we're going to go about right now and talk about the wrong way to gain those leadership positions. And one of the things that I looked at here was close to the end of the book, while during his time in Vietnam, what his examination was of how leaders were getting to their next place, and why Vietnam was becoming such a disaster of leadership, and why we were losing that war. And yes, I do want to be very, very delicate and respectful of how we relate these things from a book about war, a book that talks about the loss of human life because of war, and what we do on a day-to-day basis as athletic trainers. There probably is zero comparison, but there are lessons to be learned here. And I want to read a little snippet out of here about the idea of grabbing at the coattails to be a leader. Hackworth writes, the Army was no more the Army was no more warriors than it was clerks' desire to zero the warriors out. It was just part of the big scramble to get ahead. And ironic to me that junior officers who would grab at the coattails of the up-and-coming superiors were always on the lookout for what they perceived to be the up-and-coming juniors to propel them ever steward from below. So you're seeing the ones that are trying to get ahead surround themselves with people that were going to agree with them, to allow their position to be elevated too. So rather than people learning or earning their position of leadership, they're surrounding themselves with the wrong type of people. And you see this over and over again in this book. You see this over and over again about lessons that we talk about in leadership. Surrounding yourself with people that are going to help you get ahead, but the correct way, rather than just saying yes, 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 until you get in that position where you haven't learned anything. You've surrounded yourself with people who are false idols, or people who don't know what they're talking about. And when you have to make a critical decision and the people that are around you that may stop you from making that decision aren't there, and you're going to continuously make wrong decisions. Kevin, thoughts?
I mean, that's the great example of not being in an echo chamber. If everyone in the room, and I'm not advocating just the person who's always like, well, I'm going to be devil's advocate. You're not being a devil's advocate. You're just being an ass most of the time. But if everyone agrees with the idea when it's presented, have you really fleshed out the idea? There should be someone in your inner circle who you're willing to look at and say, this is the idea I have, take it apart piece by piece and find the flaws. And there's nothing wrong with having people that agree with you, but even as your leader, you have to be willing to say, hey, that's a great idea initially, but if we do this small tweak to it, now we get to a better place. And as a young leader, that's hard. How hard is it to speak up in a meeting and be like, hey, I think we should do something different. And that's the challenge, because especially in something that's very hierarchical like the military, the more you speak up, the less points you're going to get, and you're not going to advance. So you have to really be comfortable in your situation in order to do that. And I think, again, it's not a direct translation to what we do, but we're in an organization. We're all in organizations, and it's that willingness that Hackworth demonstrates time and time again, is that clear, honest feedback, no matter how hard it is to hear, is ultimately the best. I think you're going to reference it later. We'll get to it. But his letter, when he's one of the 16 people in the Army that are tasked with giving their unvarnished opinion on how things went in Vietnam, and he just both barrels and is 100% honest. And you read the asterisk in the footnote about one of the others that completely came at it from a different way, that was like, oh no, we need to spin that we can spin this to our advantage. So I do think that you have to be wary of an echo chamber as a leader, that you need some healthy discussion and some healthy dissent in order to get to the best decision possible.
That's the kind of the next point I was going to talk about was, it's a simple line in the book, but when you look at the pages that surround it, he was in a meeting and he was talking about there's a 300% input of Ranger School, and he's talking about so many people going in, and they're in a meeting, and he stands up and he says, yeah, hey, that's great, 300% sounds amazing, but however, we went from 0 to 3. So of course that 300 number looks great, but and then he gets into a little bit of an argument with the corporal that was presenting it. But he wrote simply in the book, figures don't lie, but liars figure. So this person was throwing out this big grandiose number. It was, hey, it was puffed up, it was beautiful, and things are looking great because we're up 300%. Well, hey, listen, the true figure is that you went from 0 to 3. So it goes kind of to that point that you're talking about, is, you surround yourself with people that are going to test you, but also help you with that. Yeah, he was a little bit more brash, but yeah, he was trying to prove the point that, listen, if you want to lie to get ahead, you're not going to get there. People aren't going to trust you and believe.
About figures and data, how often do we see that in our world of, hey, we're going to measure this because it's easy to measure, but does it really have an impact in what we do? It's all of the fancy, the latest gadgets that kids want to use, or things that collect data that, just because you measure it doesn't mean it's important. And keeping things in perspective of that And that's a great example of, yeah, we increased 300%, 3 people. That it's not that you have to be careful in how you phrase things again. And I think that again illustrates my comment earlier about Hackworth was 100% about not sugarcoating things. He was gonna give it to you as clear as could be, so that you could understand. So that not only he was going to disseminate information, and this is the leadership lesson. He was going to disseminate information clearly to the 2-star general in the same way, same effectiveness as he was the lance corporal who was going to be carrying out the mission. And that's rare, to be able to move within ranges like that. And how was he successful? The people that are successful in that, they're clear. They tailor their language to whom they're talking to, but the message doesn't change. And I think that's one of the lessons of can you communicate well, and how does that apply in our daily function, in the athletic training room. You guys that are at the high school level, you have to be able to give clear feedback and instructions to coaches as to what this kid can and can't do. You have to give clear feedback and instruction to the student athlete of, this is what I want you to do. This is you're going to do this rehab activity while I go over here and check on the soccer field. That's how, again, that's back to my comment about doing your job and doing your job well. How good of a how clearly can you communicate?
It's so important because, you when we were talking with an athlete and you say, hey, the outside of your ankle hurts, but then you have to turn around and talk to your physician and say lateral malleolus, right? You're saying the same thing, but it's how you tailor those messages to those people to gain the trust between everybody. And that's so important when it comes to leadership. Like you said, you have to be honest. You have to have a strong moral, output. But you have to be able to tailor your message to every single person. And sometimes leaders just can't do that. You see this a lot, I think, because we're in the healthcare world. You see physicians who are so good but cannot communicate to their patients, especially the high school patients or the college patients from out of the country. How can you communicate? Those ones that are able to communicate are so powerful, and they're stronger leaders than anyone else can be.
Right. Or how many times have you heard this? Oh, this surgeon is the best surgeon for this condition in the city, but I'm gonna preface right now, he's got a horrible bedside manner. And it's like, well, how much more effective as a healthcare practitioner would this guy be, or woman be, the surgeon, if they had a better bedside manner? If someone honestly gave them feedback and said, hey doc, you're great with the knife, but I don't want to interact. I'd rather deal with your PA. But of course we get into that structure of again, this is what Hackworth demonstrated time and time again, is I'm going to speak truth to power. And that is a moral courage that I'm not even sure I possess all the time, because that is so laden with potential bad consequences that it's hard. And ultimately that's where the courage of leadership, I think, comes in, is that being able to speak truth to power. And that goes back to communication. And it's interesting, you talk about tailoring your message. I've got a student with me for the first time in a while, and watching them struggle with that, and him recognizing that, oh, hey, I'm not doing a good job communicating. Well, okay, well, how can we help you get better? How do you, because he gets into that, some of the, like, hey, I'm using one set of language here, and they're not the right sets, and they're mixed up. And to watch that growth as he he learns the lesson is impactful for me.
Yeah, it's really impactful on how to learn how to communicate, and it's a constant practice, right? Sometimes you think that you've got it, and then you run into somebody new, and you're like, oh, I don't know how to communicate with this person. And then you have to learn how to communicate with that person. It's relationship building 101. It's communication styles for every single person. And then when we talk at leadership, there's a difference between being a leader and a manager, and then
100.
also being an orator. So yes, you can be a really good person when it comes to talking, but are your actions going to match what you're saying as well? So you have to be careful about being an orator versus a leader and versus a manager, right?
A great example off the Hackworth topic, but Ryan Holiday and the Daily Stoic, he talks about the pen and paper Stoic, the pen and paper philosopher who expounds. Yeah, I'm on like my 5th year through it. Yeah, it's phenomenal. But he talks about the pen and paper Stoic who talks a great game, but actions don't match. And it's only important it only matters and is only impactful if your actions match the words you say. And I agree completely that just because you can stand up, how many times have we seen this in athletics? The head coach who can stand up in front of the team and give the fiery pregame speech and then promptly just steps aside and lets people underneath them do everything on the sideline. That someone else manages the game and whatnot, versus, and your example of there's absolutely a difference between a leader and a manager. And I think, to me, the big difference is the manager can problem solve and can identify the people that help solve the problems, but the manager is going to struggle in identifying what the problem is. And that's where, and true leadership, I think, is rare. There's the people like Hackworth that come along once in a generation that give us the example that we should aspire to. But I think as soon as we say, well, I'm a leader and I've got this figured out, that no, you don't. And recognizing where your own flaws are. And this is something that's kind of hit home for me as I've got 3 months left as president of MATS, and I'm starting to reflect and look back over my 2 years. And if I'm objectively grading myself, and I said this to the student that's with me the other day, I abhor plus minus grades. So I'm giving myself a solid C as my time as president. And I've made that comment to some other people, and they're like, well, no, you've done a much more phenomenal job and things like that. And it's like, okay, great, that's your opinion. But as I reflect, if I tell you, hey, I think I did an A's work on this, then I'm not objectively measuring and reviewing and reflecting on my experiences, because I think there's always lessons to be learned in that. And Hackworth shows us that time and time again, about the lessons he learned previously sort of apply to the new situation, but he takes things away from it, and that makes him better for the next time he faces that situation.
We talked about how his examination of Vietnam went, and we're talking about managers, and I'm going to read this right here because I think it just blends right into the next topic of the right way to go about things by looking at the past and how things were mismanaged going forward. He writes in his review, his study at the end of Vietnam, the tactical know-how of senior officers displayed in Vietnam is deplorable. The condition has resulted in a failure to understand how to fight the guerrilla. The root cause of this debacle is that for the past decade, our army has been concerned with developing high-level corporate managers, and in the main, our officer corps has been scurrying about busily collecting tickets, meaning they're just collecting the next thing to become the next level person. Consequently, we have few soldiers who understand what it's about at the point of the bayonet level, meaning all they've done is just study. They've been around the right people. They've gone up in rank, but they don't know how to communicate with the people below them or know what those people are going through in order to assist them. And if you don't have an understanding of what's going on below you, around you, then it's almost impossible to be a leader, or almost impossible even to be a manager, because you're not listening to those people around you. The more you're able to do that, the more you're able to assist them and to go forward in whatever the mission is, or whatever the next standard that you're trying to reach. If you're not able to do that, you're just never going to get better. You're never going to be able to lead that next, whatever it is that's ahead of you.
And I think, John, the great example of that is not only do you need to know what's going on below you, but you need to understand what that job is. And, leadership 101 is never ask a subordinate to do something you're not willing to do. And if that means you show up at 6 a.m. to see how the COVID screening is going before practice and pitch in and help with that, that's what you have to do. And I think the problem we get into with leadership is when they're so detached, they're not aware of what's going on day to day. Does your athletic director need to be present every day that you're doing something? No. Good Lord. No one wants that. But at the same time, much like athletic training, if the only time you go and communicate with your coaches is when you deliver bad news, well, you're going to get a reputation as the angel of death, and no one's going to want to talk to you when they see you walk down the hallway. It's about building that relationship and understanding what's going on to help understand, so that when you go to the administration and say, hey, we need to readdress our schedule because we're looking at, with everything extra we're doing with COVID, we're looking at, like a 60-hour week, and that's just not sustainable. And them not understanding, well, oh, wow, yeah, this is really, because it may not be because it's an oversight. They may not have forgotten about you. They may be busy with other things, but that's like you said, knowing what's going on the ground level from the higher up command, not only knowing where they are and what they're doing, but how to do their job, so that you can understand that, oh yeah, hey, we're asking unrealistic things. That's the hard part of leadership, because the more responsibility you have, the less time you have for things like that. What's the line? Forget where I read it. Everyone in the typical organization, someone is promoted one level beyond their competence, because you're good at what you do. You're given more responsibilities. You're successful. They keep layering things on. You get a promotion, and now all of a sudden you're you're beyond your skill set, and now you're not able to do the things that made you successful and got you to that point.
I think one of the best things is his examination of himself when it comes to leadership. And you just said it. If you're promoted one level ahead than you're able to be, you have to be very honest with yourself and start delegating and being better at delegating those duties around you. And that goes with having the right people around you too. Mm-hmm. Before we get into the interview part, because for me, that was one of the strongest parts of the book, really right at the end, being honest with himself, but also being brutally honest with why we were losing the war and what was going on around him. Is there anything else that you wanted to add from the book that's
I think, yeah, if you start talking about the self-reflection, absolutely, his interview when he just lays bare. Yeah.
So there's,
and real quick, being a child of the 80s, and born in 72, and seeing vague remembrances of some of the coverage of Vietnam on the TV and the aftermath, some of the interview really resonates keeping in mind how much courage it took to make this stand at that point in time was, yeah, it's no wonder he moved to Australia. He had to abandon ship because was not popular.
Yeah, and that's the hard part too, is being able to raise your hand when you know something isn't right. And I've said it before, and I'll keep saying this. This book, although I read it last summer, it didn't start resonating with me until about April or May this year because of what is going on here.
Yep.
And we don't have enough people raising their hand to say, hey, whoa. Or, oh, I'm sorry, maybe we do have enough people raising their hand, but the people who have found themselves in leadership positions have found themselves unable to actually lead because they've gotten there the incorrect way, and unable to listen to the people when they say, this is not the way we need to go about things. You know, Kevin, if we're going to be brutally honest, we are in a state right now, Michigan, where things are not being handled as probably great as they should be when it comes to some of the athletics, because people just want to push ahead. They're fatigued with the pandemic, and they want to put the blinders on, but they're not going to listen to the right people.
Yeah, we're going to drive on.
Yeah.
I think, and you put it in terms like that. Yes, that it takes a lot of moral courage to say we're not going to play games this fall. My institution is one of the few in our conference at the small college level who said, not only are we not playing games this fall, but we're not going to practice as teams. We're gonna do small group stuff, and the groups can't mix, and put such regulations and restrictions on what we were allowed to do and we've handled things really well. We've not had a massive outbreak, and hearing the feedback and like, this is BS. Everyone else, it's that keeping up with the Joneses. Everyone else is doing it over here. Why can't we? And it's like and being able to step back and from a framework of decision making and seeing that, hey, the leadership of the college is framing decisions through this window and this lens, and it has nothing to do with what your lens is over here. And until you shift your perspective to help understand how they're making decisions, you're going to be frustrated. And that frustration is only 100% your fault. Because you're right. We're in such a unique situation here in the lovely Mitten State that, yeah, I'm really looking forward to January.
So real quick, Rick Cox was watching live, and Perry said, shout out to Kevin, fellow Miami Redhawk, something like that.
Perry and I attended the same undergrad, not at the same time, but have a long standing connection. Thanks, Perry.
Yep. So Rick was talking about how Jocko in his books talks about how he would scramble the radio so that the guys knew how to fix it, and because they needed to know how to do that job, everybody needed to know how to fix their own radio and be the comms guy just in case. So, Rick, thanks for checking in live. Go ahead, John.
So, we're going to talk about the interview and the courage that it took to actually go on live TV. So in 1971, he was on a show called Issues and Answers, where the host, who was the host? Howard Tucker for ABC, asked the honest questions about what was going on. And rather than just kind of reading through and going through the whole interview, I did try to find a link to it, but I couldn't find it. Obviously, it was 1971, so there's probably not that many recordings left, but you can find some things on the internet from this. But if you do want to grab the book, whether it's from the library or whatever, it's the very end of the book where he wrote it. He just put the transcription into the book as to what was said. And for me, it goes back to being the manager, being the leader, and how honest he was. Mr. Tucker, he asked, did the upper echelon of the Army ever really become changed? Did the upper echelon of the Army ever really become changed on the word? Did they ever learn from their mistakes? And Hackworth goes on and says, no. I think the top managers of the Army, so he's not even talking about the leaders, he's talking about the managers of the Army. The big difference between being a leader, a combat leader, and a manager, the top managers were so involved in system analysis and the normal bureaucracy of all that it was, from the fighting day to day, that they just moved paper across the desk and they couldn't see the forest from the trees. And that's one of the things that Kevin has kind of touched upon, is if you aren't able to see the forest from the trees, if you're not able to step back and look at everything to get a big picture, then you're not detached enough to make appropriate decision makings. He went on to talk about the measurement of success. And if you look at the book and you read about Vietnam, the measure of success in Vietnam was the death toll, or the death ratio. If it was 10-1, then we were winning. But if you're using that type of measurement, that's a false measurement. You are just looking at one small thing rather than the whole picture. And his examination was, that's what exactly was going on. We were promoting people up and using a false measurement to tell ourselves that we're winning. So they weren't being honest with themselves. They weren't being honest with how they're going about things. And the measurements and the people around them were yes men. And the measurement, that 300%, or the ratio is so high that if you just look at those things, hey, we're winning, but you're not being honest with yourself. And you have to have a strong moral, courage around yourself to say, maybe we're not winning. Maybe this is the wrong measurement of success. And then how can you get people around you to challenge yourself into learning these types of lessons so that you can change direction when you need to? I opened the podcast today with a quote from General McChrystal. If About Face is Jocko's book to go to, I've slowly realized that Things That General McChrystal is my kind of about face. And I just finished the book, My Share of the Task by him. And that was a quote out of the book. And there's so many lessons to be learned from the recent wars here from General McChrystal that are very similar to what happened with David Hackworth in Vietnam and how he stepped away from the military life.
Yeah, John, I think you hit on a point there. Again, that cliche forest for the trees. And what that really just means is that you're so focused on your own role that you don't see how your role impacts everyone else. And I think those of us that work in athletics, whether you're talking the highest echelons of Division I athletics or the NFL, all the way down to what some would consider the lowly high school athletic trainer, and I'm air quoting that because I think that's a complete bullshit perspective. But part of our role and what we deal with every day is helping people understand that there's more going on than your basketball practice. There's more going on outside of your lane of ice hockey or whatever sport you're coaching, and that and we all have coaches who get it, and we have coaches who don't. I have coaches that before they even contemplate a schedule change will look at me and say, hey, does that work in your schedule? Are you okay with that? And it's not window dressing. That's legitimate. That if I say, yeah, no, I can't readjust our schedule to be there, they're like, okay, we won't do it. Versus the coaches that you deal with, like that how many times have you had a coach change a game time on you and not tell you? That helping, and this is leadership, helping everyone understand that there's more going on than just what they see in front of them. One of the lasting lessons that I learned as a younger athletic trainer was when I was working at the high school in Oregon. And my first spring there, spring sports are rolling along, and game times are early in the afternoon, and we hit the time change. We spring forward, and now all of a sudden we go from like a 5 p.m. start for a game to a 7 p.m. start. And I was lamenting to the principal that, wow, this is just really making, that I don't understand. And I was pushing back, like, this is just doesn't work for me. And I might have asked you, well, why are we doing this? And the principal, one of the best people I've ever worked for, love the man to death, Jim Jameson. He's retired now, but carry lessons forward from him today. And he looked at me and goes, well, Kevin, parents like to watch their kids play games. And the socioeconomic status of our kids, most of our kids our parents are working, and it's really challenging for them to get to games that start at 4 and 5 o'clock. So if we have enough available light, we're going to move our times back so that they can watch their games. And then he added this, we're sorry that it inconveniences your schedule, but but this is what we need to do. And it was that light bulb went off, and it's like, oh yeah, it's not about me. And that was that moment that he exhibited excellent leadership of helping me understand that there's more going on in the forest besides the one single tree that I'm focused on in front of me. And yes, that's an easy conversation from a superior to a subordinate, but that's what you have to do. You have to look at the people you're dealing with, the administrator, and say, yeah, that it's great, that works better for them, but the downstream cascade domino effect is that the person working that sport's going to have 15 days in a row of working. Do you think that's appropriate? And they go, oh, okay, well, didn't see that. And again, sometimes it's not malicious. It's just, hey, I'm so focused on other things. I'm so focused on this one thing that I've got blinders on, and I need a moment. I need someone, it's that classic story Jocko tells on his podcast when he learned to detach on the oil rig, that, hey, I'm going to take a step back and say, oh yeah, we just need to do this. It's not a malicious thing. It's a hyper focus that we deal with, and that's leadership, helping people modulate between that hyper focus and that detached so you can see the big picture. Did that make sense?
Yeah, it's so important, and there's so many lessons to be learned from this book. And I think detachment has been one of them for me, is taking that step back and looking around, whether it's in my personal life, whether it's at work. If you're unable to do that, it's a practice. You have to continuously practice and try to do it, because if you don't see it, you're not going to learn, and you're not going to be able to lead. And that's really difficult to do. It's an honest thing. It's a courageous thing to say, I don't know what's going on right now. I need to take a bigger look at this thing, right, and then make a decision. So,
and truly, it puts people, it's off-putting to people. People I mentioned this to Jeremy, people are expecting that fly off the handle reaction. They're expecting when they tell you, hey, when they tell you that, hey, the schedule has changed and this is going to happen, they're expecting you to push back. And if you pause for a second and you choose your reaction and like, okay, yeah, I see why you're making this change, instead of just automatically pushing back, it's off-putting. And a lot of times it de-escalates and that potential conflict and just deflates people. And that's how you get known. Again, we started with, how do you earn the right to be a leader? You be good at your job. And part of being good at your job is, and especially in what we're doing, is you got to be calm. You can't, when it hits the fan, everyone's going to turn and look at you like, oh, okay, everything's okay. I'm sure, John, and Jeremy, at the high schools that you guys are at on Friday night, if someone sees you not in a panic but moving with urgency, they understand that things aren't going well. Correct?
Yeah, I mean, it is very disarming when you are disarmed yourself.
Yep.
When somebody comes at you and they're hot and you're like, listen, okay, I understand you, or whatever the situation may be. Yep. When you're able to disarm somebody, it then puts all the power into your hands. But you can easily lose the power by becoming, as hot as that person is. That happened to me. We talked about conflict resolution. That happened to me about a month ago. I disarmed a person with how calm I was, and then it continued to escalate, and then I lost all control of the situation because I became more hot than the other person did.
Yep.
But then at the end of the day, when I was able to come back and have that humility and say, listen, I was wrong at that point, and then apologize, it not only disarmed the person further, but now
Oh yeah.
they were always an advocate for me, but then they became a stronger advocate for me and
Yep.
helping with our students. So yeah, it is a practice. You definitely have to learn it, and you have to continuously practice it.
And to have the humility to come back and say, "Hey, I'm sorry, I flew off the handle there." It shows maturity, and much like that's as disarming and off-putting as being calm in the initial situation. And you're right, it's a sorry, my fax machine. I hope it's not messing with the audio.
No.
Fax machine, getting a physical faxed in looks like. Yeah, and it's absolutely a challenge. And however you do that, whether it's meditation, prayer, Stoicism, Buddhism, Christianity, it doesn't matter what your vehicle to that is.